Dr. Wenstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being with us today, Secretary Yellen. Appreciate it. Much of our conversation today has been focused on the future of our nation's tax code, of course, as we approach the expiration of many key policies from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act next year. You know, when I think about tax policy, I think about making America the best place in the world to do business, and for that matter, the best place to work. And right now, we're in a fierce global economic, political, and strategic competition. It's not the same as after World War II. Our adversaries like China want to dominate the world markets, and they're doing that. And they want to make America and our allies dependent on key industries and supply chains. I know you know that. Keeping our tax code globally competitive is a crucial part of strengthening our domestic manufacturing base and reducing our dependence on unreliable supply chains, or those that can be used as weapons, if so desired, by our adversaries. Secretary, I know you've spoken at length about the need for de-risking. I agree with you on that when it comes to our economic relationship with China and your desire to see more friendshoring of our critical supply chains. I also know you recently visited China, thank you for doing that, to discuss economic issues, including the massive subsidy-driven industrial overcapacity that China has built, which is distorting global markets. I'm not sure that we can always change what they do and their practices, but we can and should see what we can do to counter that. And I'm glad you focused on the risks of China than what they pose to our security. But I'm concerned that the administration's tax policy proposals would take us in exactly the wrong direction when it comes to our economic security and our national security, for that matter. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a huge step towards making our tax code globally competitive, bringing more business investment back to the United States. Since it passed, we've seen zero corporate inversions, and instead we've seen American businesses bringing back their overseas earnings to fuel investment and wage growth here in the States. So now more than ever, we need to be working together to build on that type of progress, not reverse it by imposing crippling tax hikes on American families and businesses. I believe that's exactly what will happen if we do not act to renew key provisions of the 2017 tax reform law when they expire next year. Meanwhile, the negotiators from your department representing us at the OECD are preparing to give away the U.S. tax base and allow foreign countries to impose discriminatory taxes on U.S. companies. This does not help us. Anyone who runs a business would understand that. I believe that tax increases proposed by the President's budget and the failed global tax negotiations being supported by this administration would severely harm our efforts to rebuild our domestic manufacturing and bring home critical supply chains. Secretary, the President's budget proposes increasing the corporate tax rate, so one of the highest in the world, even higher than communist China, which will make it much harder to bring manufacturing home from China, and to meet your desire to de-risk from the PRC. One example, the Chinese have a monopoly on generic medications, all the way down to the active pharmaceutical ingredients. How do we break that monopoly and reduce our health risk, our national security risk, by increasing corporate tax rates, making us unable to compete? I mean, are you against or are you for domestic supply chain production to enhance our national security and our national health security for our critical needs? Because I just don't see how increasing corporate tax rate, making us less competitive in the world, is going to bring business back to the United States where we need it most.
I certainly agree with the goal of having resilient supply chains. The idea of friendshoring means we'll work with trusted allies, and in addition to sourcing domestically. In the case of critical drugs, certainly I think that's an area where it's important that we have domestic capacity and are not totally reliant on China and other countries that may not prove dependable in the future. And there are a variety of ways to promote this.
Excuse me, though. Who are we going to depend on then? If we're increasing our corporate tax rate, that doesn't make us more competitive. And are we going to rely on our allies to reduce theirs? Is that the idea? I mean, this just makes no sense.
Well,
We've had no one leave.
I would point out that the Pillar 2 agreement does impose taxes on China, that regardless of what their subsidies are or how they choose to tax, the United States and other countries that adopt Pillar 2 will have the ability to place taxes up to this minimum tax on China to try to level the playing field. So China will not gain any advantage if it chooses. It has said it will implement the deal.
I
But
doubt
if
that.
it doesn't do so, we will implement the deal on Chinese multinationals that compete with ours through a provision called the undertax payment rule.
Well, you had conversations with him. I would doubt that they said that they would cut their subsidies. I yield back.